So today we're going to be talking about exploring web developer careers and how you can get started in web development. So I'm going to have a little bit of slides in the beginning. I'm going to get into some code also. We're going to talk about high-level code. We're going to see some things that just show the list of technologies to give you like an overview picture, and then we'll dive into some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it's a lot to cover in just 45 minutes to an hour, so I will try to go through the slides a little bit quicker so that you can see the code a little bit longer and make sure we've got some time for Q&A at the end. All right, so what is a developer? So a full stack web developer builds a layered logical flow of the data from storage user interface. So that just means everything. They build everything that you see with an application. So the front end is what runs in our browser, in Chrome or Firefox or IE. And so a lot of times there's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in there, and there's other technologies as well that we'll talk about. And so you could just be a front-end only developer and only worry about those technologies. And so maybe you want to specialize in that. But maybe like front-end isn't your thing. You don't really like doing that, like because the front-end focuses on not just how it looks, but just how the flow is for the user. Maybe you just want to deal with more of the data and you don't care about the user side of things. If that's the case, there's also back-end code that runs on a server. So we'll see what a couple of those technologies are here shortly. But so that would mean you would be more like a back-end developer. So we got back-end developer, front-end developer, and then there's also database. So you could focus just on the data itself, making sure there's good data integrity, and making sure that you can analyze the data and see, well, how should we use this data for this purpose? And so some people are just more data-oriented and they just care about the data. So that's three types of development you could really do in the web development space. If you want to do all three of them, that's what a full stack developer is. And so it's kind of like, oh, I want to pick and choose in different days. I want to work on different kinds of parts of that development stack. Or you might want to focus on one of them. So your choice there. Server is where it's just hosted. So you've probably heard of Amazon and Amazon Web, AWS, Amazon Web Services. That's just a way to provision servers in the cloud, so you don't have to worry about buying a computer yourself and putting it up somewhere and connecting it to the internet. They do all that for you and you just provision it. And there's a number of DevOps tools. So maybe you just want to orchestrate that happening. That would be more of a DevOps role. So it'd be less code, but you'll be dealing with the deploying of other code and automating the deployment of that code to the environments as new versions are ready. Okay, so the next part here. I just want to do a little bit of brief overview about me so we know what we're talking about here. My name is Michael Lang. I've been a developer since '99. I've worked at a number of companies. Some of them are shown here in the slide. I'm currently also now the lead instructor at Nexul Academy. It's a company I've started. So we teach classes there. We show people how to get into development and we dive deep into it. So the next slide here, this is what your space is. Like this is as a developer, and this isn't even really every technology that you could do development with. This is just kind of like a lot of the big popular ones. All right. So like I said before, there's front end, middleware, and database. That's these first three slices here, front end, middleware, and database. The middleware is like that back end developer role. So with the front end, we start with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That is what the browser understands. That's really all it understands. I guess there's that not completely true. There are some new things coming out where you can do C# in the browser as well, but it's primarily those three. Now those are fine if you're going to do like a smaller application. Maybe you're doing a single site. Maybe it's got a subscribe now button on the page or like a single form. But as you start to scale and you're like building a huge, like a Facebook or a Twitter, or just like an expense reporting application for your company, those can get really complicated. And doing that just in plain JavaScript for all the execution code can get really difficult and hard to manage the code. So that's what these other three icons to the left, to the bottom are of the front end stack. The Angular, that's the big A in the shield. React is the nuclear looking one. And the V is Vue.js. So these are three main libraries that make building large JavaScript applications easy. There's advantages to each one. Angular is by Google. Google uses it on pretty much every site that Google owns. So you're talking about AdWords and Gmail and like everything else you've heard of that they do. I've heard they've got somewhere in the range of 1,000 applications that use Angular inside of Google. So you know it's really well supported. And if there's any kind of security vulnerability, they're going to fix that ASAP because they don't want to lose a lot of money in AdWords and so forth. So good support model there. So a lot of companies trust that for their own development as well. Then you got React. React is made by Facebook. So if you've ever used Facebook, that is running on React, at least maybe as of today. It's been React for a long time. I did hear some news. They are phasing out. They might be moving to something else. So before I would have told you, I think the last time I gave this talk, I was saying that, oh, which one do you just want to go with? You want to go with Facebook or Google? Your choice. I'm not sure I can really say that about React going forward much longer because they're not going to be dog fooding and using their own framework anymore. So I'm a little more skeptical of it today than I was before. With Vue.js, this is a community-driven framework that does the same thing as the other two. So all three of these do the same type of thing for your application. Vue.js is just pure JavaScript and it's community-driven. So if there's vulnerabilities, there's thousands of developers out there that are probably gonna be working on a bug fix. So you know that it's not one company supporting it. So like if you just wanna rely on that big, huge community, you know that somebody's probably gonna fix those kind of issues. If you're looking at it from the job market perspective, there are more jobs in St. Louis for Angular or React. That's just the frameworks that the big companies pick because they like to have a company that they can tag and say, well, that company is really gonna fix my issues. I don't wanna rely on a network of 1,000 developers to just have goodwill to fix it. So that's kind of the different determining factor there. But if you're doing your own company or something, Vue is like a great option. You'll find a number of startups using that as well. And it's used more on the coast as well. For the middleware, the two big players here that I see, at least for jobs in St. Louis, is C#.net and Java. That's a lot of the job placement requirements that I see on a lot of the job search sites require one of those two. There's also Python and PHP. These are taught at a lot of big schools. And so, you know, like you're talking like Launch Code or something, they teach Python and PHP a lot. Node.js is another option for the backend. A lot of these have a lot of the same syntax. So syntactically, it's gonna be similar if you learn one to move to the other. The things that are different are libraries. One advantage Node.js has is that it's still JavaScript. So if you're doing JavaScript in the browser, doing JavaScript on the backend, it's gonna be exact same syntax. But that doesn't mean it's the same exact code. You know, you will have some common code like the filter function on array will still work the same on the front and the back end. But there's other things in the back end that aren't in the front end. So like if you're interacting with the server itself, well, that code is not something you'd ever write for the front end. If you're interacting in the front end with the web page itself and getting elements by ID, you're not going to do that stuff in the back end. So there's still stuff different to learn front end and back end JavaScript for Node.js versus JavaScript in the browser. But there's still a lot of commonalities. So you kind of play on all those different ideas for like what do you want to choose as your tech stack. And then database, there's either SQL or NoSQL. That's pretty much your two options at a high level. But again, it dives down deep from there. You've got different vendors for each one. SQL Server is the big one by Microsoft. You got MySQL, which is open source, but still maintained by a large company. You've got Oracle that's not listed on this slide, but that's another big company as well. I've found SQL Server for me is kind of the best fit, but it might not be the same fit for everybody. MongoDB and Firebase are more key value storages. They are great for really large data sets and documents where maybe not every record has the same exact columns and the same data points. And so that might be an option as well. So keep that in mind. DevOps is the process of deploying the code once it's written into an infrastructure environment. So whether that's Amazon's AWS or Microsoft's Azure on the infrastructure side, these other tools like Azure DevOps, Jenkins, TeamCity, and there's a number of other ones as well that can all help you with that deployment process automatically. So Git is your source control. It's like when you make a change to code, you're probably going to put it into Git. It's the most common source control system. And these other tools on the DevOps column will help monitor that. And when there's code pushed to a certain point, like the production branch, it'll just automatically handle the deployment process if you set it up correctly. So high level, that's about what we got going on here. And so what I would say is that whatever you want to do, you're probably going to want to narrow this down. Nobody wants to learn all of this technology just to get started in development. It's way too overwhelming. It's going to take way too long. And when you finish, there's just going to be more stuff. So you really want to slice this down to what is going to work for you. Here's the stack that I picked for myself. It might not be what you picked, but this is what I picked. So I've gone more with the Angular on the front end. side of things. I'm glad I did now that I've heard the news about React. C# is just what I've started with. I started with .NET 1.0, so I've just always been on that path. I feel like it's learned a lot of lessons from Java because it was created after Java. So they learned lessons from whatever else is out there. But with that said, there's other newer ones out there. There's one called Go. That's used by a company called Centene in town. So if you ever heard of them, really large company. So they're not as feature rich as C# and Java, but they will get there someday. So with that said, if you want to go with the newest, well, maybe Go is the right thing. But if you want to go with kind of new, but then also really powerful and really expansive, C# is a great option. All right, so when you're trying to learn about this code, what process do you go about? You could definitely go to YouTube. You can watch a lot of videos. You can go to Pluralsight. There's some online video courses there. Here's a couple of things you need to keep in track though when you're learning to code. First, you want great courseware. So there's a lot of places you can go get that, lots of places. Two is you want to find some way to get mentorship. Because when you're going through that courseware, even if it was published 2 days ago, there's gonna be something in it that doesn't work today. Take for instance, Angular. They are pushing new releases out all the time. So if you just say, yeah, I want to start a new Angular project with the latest version, it should work, but there might be some compiled dependencies on the side saying, oh, this version is out of date. You should be using something else. And so there's just little things that'll crop up that'll just be like, well, that doesn't work today. And it shows it working in the courseware video I just watched. So little things will come up. Sometimes you might just copy one thing wrong and then it's like, that just blew the whole thing up. I don't know what I copied wrong. And so you will want some mentorship as you're going through. So wherever you can find that, there's lots of places you can find mentorship. One is Nexul Academy, of course. Two is STL Tech is a Slack group. That's one I highly recommend. Anybody can join that. I think it's over 3,300 members as of today. There's a number of meetup groups you can go to as well. You want to find a channel where you can find someone that is an expert in the field that you could talk to a lot and to get your questions answered. So once you've learned all the code and you could build a little project on your own, how do you get hired? So a lot of companies will want to make sure that you are going to work on their team environment. They're going to want to know, okay, do you know the technology? Can you apply that to provide value in my organization? And so one way that they can kind of gauge that is just say, well, I'm just going to require a year experience. And so I don't know if you've seen, there have been a number of Venture Cafe presentations in the past where like, well, all these companies keep saying I need to have a year experience, but you're hiring junior level. How does this match up? Junior level should mean no experience. So really, I've taken that experience required statement is more of, it's declaring an intention. They want to know that you're going to work on their team. They don't necessarily need to say that, well, you have to have exactly 1 year C# experience or whatever. So it's more about, can you work on a team? And so there's a couple ways that you can prove that to a company. One way, you could find a charity and you could work on their team. So maybe you want to, whatever you're passionate about, maybe it's St. Louis Public Radio, maybe it's, you know, some women's shelter, whatever it is. You could partner with them and say, is there something you need? Can I build something for you? And so you're in that process of building something for that charity. You're saying, you're working with that team. You're saying, okay, what do you need? I'm going to try to work that. Okay, here's a version of it. How's it look? What can we change? And so you got some teamwork going on there. Now that's a business to coder relationship. And maybe they have some other volunteer developers you could work with. So that could help build some team project experience. Or you can find an open source project. There's thousands of them out there. You probably want to pick a bigger one, just so that there's got a little name recognition going on there. So you could say, yeah, I contributed to jQuery or I contributed to Angular or whatever, and you might have fixed like 5 bugs, but getting 5 bugs, getting one bug pushed through onto Angular is no easy task. You know, I mean, not only do you just have to get code that works, you have to make a lot of tests that prove that it works. And yet there's a big review process to get that down. So you got to do a lot of teamwork, a lot of collaboration with that team to make sure that it's a fit for their solution they're providing. So these types of things will give you that experience to get a job. Maybe you want to work for a startup. Venture Cafe, there's lots of startups here, right? So maybe you're a startup. I don't know, does anybody here have a startup? And it might be hard to say this with everybody muted. I'm guessing at least one person here has a startup. Um, okay, I see at least one hand raised, and I can only see 4 faces because of how
You can have it put it in the chat.
Okay, sure. Yeah, put in the chat if you have a startup. Maybe someone here will want to talk to you about helping on your project. So you really just want to show that you have experience. And if, you know, a startup here, maybe they want to find someone in here that has learned some code, but they're trying to figure out to get their job. Maybe you can work together and work something out there. So you want to make sure you have that. The next thing you want to have, if you didn't already get a job at one of these startups, is maybe you want some job coaching. So there's a lot of mistakes to be made on a resume. If you go search Google and you say, what's a good resume template? You're going to find a whole bunch of things and they're all junk. They're all going to say, put your work experience first, your education, and your hobbies or something at the bottom. You know, it's like, just like, here's a standard flow resume. That's not what a resume is for. A resume is to tell a story about who you are and why you will provide value to that company. So you should not have one resume that's you just send out to every company. That's not how a resume should work. You need to tell a story that's going to make them say, oh, I really want to bring them in and talk to them. That's your goal of the resume. So it's about organizing your resume in the way that's going to make them want to call you in. So you want to find a way to get some coaching on that. You also probably want a chance to, if you get that dream company saying, oh, I want to call you in. Okay, well, what are you going to say when you go in? You probably want to have a little practice with somebody to say, just ask me some questions about what you think an employer might ask, and let's see how I do. You know, so a mock interview is a great thing to go through to get a job. All right, so one way to do that, Nexul Academy, we happen to have self-paced courseware. It's got assignment tracking. There's no cost to our introductory courses, at least. You can see on the screen what those are. We've got Git, HTML and CSS intro, JavaScript intro, C# intro. This just gets you an idea what the coding side of things is. Okay, and the next one, we expand on that. So we've got premium courses that we do. There is a charge for it. It's got more amazing courseware. A lot of those courses are listed there. But it comes with mentoring. It's got check-ins. So like there's weekly check-ins, there's daily check-ins to get help. We also have another chat community for Nexul Academy, and we also recommend people go to the STL Tech one also for sure. We all have a team project track. So like I said, you need to get project experience somewhere. We have a somewhere to get team project experience. When you finish our courseware, you've kind of learned the material, now it's time to apply it. And so we match you up with other students that are doing the same thing, and you go through an agile team process with them to work on that project, to flesh out requirements, to build features, to get feedback, and to build a project as if you were a startup. Maybe your goal out of there is not to deploy it for sale, but it's to get experience to get hired somewhere. So we have a team project track for that. And then we do a lot of job coaching and placement help. So that resume, we've got resume workshops and mock interview sessions for that. Okay, so I'm gonna stop talking about that for a bit and just start to get into some of the code now. If you're doing front-end development, there's some main technologies involved. CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, we kind of mentioned that on that slide of all the technologies. HTML is like it's the content of what is on your page. So it's like the text, the images, and maybe some videos now and then, right? So those are the kind of the main elements of content on your page. So that doesn't describe anything about how it looks. That's just what is the content. The CSS, that's Cascade Style Sheet. That means it's the style of that page. So it'll take that content and move it in different ways, or change the size, or change colors of things. That's what its responsibility is. So a front-end developer that does like just design work will probably just stick to HTML and CSS. So that's with a page that doesn't really have any functionality. It's just to make a great looking page. Maybe it's got some animations as you scroll, or some parallax going on where things go at different paces as you roll down. All that stuff can be done with HTML and CSS. And then if you need some functionality in your page, like if they click here, I want this other thing, I want some data added to a shopping cart, or I want to add to say, any kind of favoriting a book or something. You want it to do something and add it to a database or something. Then you're going to want some JavaScript for that interaction on the page that can then call off to a server if it needs to save data somewhere. And building on top of JavaScript is TypeScript and Angular. Of course, React and Vue, those also built on JavaScript. JavaScript is the core language. TypeScript is an enhancement of JavaScript. And everything that works in JavaScript also works in TypeScript. If you're doing Angular development, you are also writing your code in TypeScript. So you get that those extra benefits that come out of TypeScript, but then it's compiling down to JavaScript for the browser. Okay, so I'll go over a couple basics of tags and so forth that's in HTML and CSS now, and then we'll drop in to see some code. All right, so HTML is made up, first of all, of tags. This is the most core thing inside of HTML. So if we see the example, we see the P inside the angle brackets, that means you want to do a paragraph. And if you take two tags, you make an element. So this element down here says it's got a P inside angle brackets and another P in angle brackets with some text inside of it. So the text inside of it is that content that is the paragraph. You denote the end tag with a slash. So notice the opening tag and the closing tag. The closing one is the same as the opening, but it has a slash. Now there's other behavior or other style or other capabilities you can add to an element with attributes. So for example, this paragraph at the bottom has a class equal ABC. So that's just to say it away, I'm going to put this in like a group, and I want all of them in the same group to look the same. So a class is a way to declare what group things are in, so that you can say, hey, all of those are red, or all of those have a background gray, or all of them have this font size. So you can treat them all as one group together. Style is just a way to say, I just want to do something custom just for this one element. It needs to do something different than the other ones, and you can put anything in here you want. This really is CSS, essentially. So anything you do in CSS, you can put in the style tag. And we'll see some samples of that in the code. And there's a bunch of other attributes. Anchors have hrefs, and you can also create your own custom attributes that your JavaScript is going to tap into as well. Okay. All right, so what can we do in CSS? First of all, there's a format to how you define CSS, and that is with a selector. So up here, you see the word selector in curly braces, and then in there you can do rules with values to those rules. So, and there's a number of types of selectors, and there's lots of different types of rules. And so the hard part of CSS is nothing to do with this syntax. That's pretty easy. It's what are all the rules I can do, and what types of selectors I can do, and how I can combine them together. So there's three really basic ones. There's an element selector. So like here, I've got just a P. That means all paragraphs is what this selector is going to do. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to make all of those color. That's the foreground text color. And then the background color is this series of Fs. So this sometimes throws people off. This is called hexadecimal format. Hexadecimal format assigns 2 characters for the 3 color spectrums. The 3 primary colors of red, green, and blue. So the primary colors are not blue, red, and yellow. Blue, red, and yellow are the primary colors only for pigments. Red, green, and blue are the primary colors in the light spectrum. And I'll do some color changing in the code here momentarily, and we'll see how does that really work. All right, so the class selector is another type. You just put a dot in front, and this selects the ABC classes. So if I go back here to this example paragraph, it's got a class equal ABC. This dot ABC selects all of those elements that have that class equals ABC on it. And then we could set other rules to other values here. Border just happens to be one of those that's a little bit different. It takes 3 components. It takes how big you want it to be, what style of line, and then what color is the line around the element. The other main type of selector is an ID selector. And this one, you always start with a hash symbol and then whatever the ID is. So notice here, this says my ID. If I come back over here, this last element here is an ID equals my ID. There's no hash symbol here. It's ID equals my ID. And then the selector is hash symbol my ID. And then inside the rules here, we can put as many of these as we want. And this case, this one was doing padding. Padding is the space around on the outside of the border. There's another we can do for space inside the border that's called margin, or actually, so that's the opposite. Padding is inside the border and margin is outside. And now we're going to jump into the code. So I'm using a tool here called VS Code. Some people call it Visual Studio Code. That's like the long form name of it. But if you're going to look for it to download it, just search for VS Code download. Over here, you open a folder when you want to get started. So I already did this. I did open folder, and then I browsed to the project folder I wanted to open. So there is no project file type syntax. If you've ever seen Visual Studio, which is like for C# code, that has project files. When you're in VS Code, which is like the front end side, it does front end applications. It does not have project files. You just open a folder, and then the files in it are what makes up the project. So in this case, I've got 2 HTML files. So I've got 2 pages in my website. I've got a home page. Your home page is typically, the file name is typically called index.html. And then contact us HTML. So I've got a contact us page here. I also have a CSS file. So it's called site.css. The name could be anything you want as long as it ends in .css. And then I also have a JavaScript file, site.js. Again, the name doesn't matter. It just has to end with .js. So let's look at a sample HTML file. In VS Code, it's kind of nice. When I hover over elements, like it'll tell me what they are and what they mean. So it's kind of giving me a link to, oh, this reference file or this reference document. If I want to open this, I can see some documentation on that element. So all the things you could do with that. Let's see, in div, it'll have the same thing. Class, it talks about different ways you can interact with it, JavaScript. So you're getting a lot of help in here as you're navigating VS Code. I'd recommend as you're opening a project, just hover over everything. Just see, does it tell you anything? It's always kind of just a way to kind of explore to figure out how to code. All right, so you can tell here we've got some paragraphs. I got another element called a div. A div is just like short for division of a page. Let's see, does it say it? This doesn't say division, but it does say it's a grouping of elements. UL is an unordered list. LI is a list item. So here we see some nesting of elements. You can do a lot of that with HTML. Most pages, if you go to them and look at them, you're going to see a lot of nested structure of HTML, and it could get kind of overwhelming looking at it at first. We'll look at one in a minute. So inside of most elements, you could nest other elements inside, and sometimes there's certain types of elements you want to put inside. In this case, an unordered list, you want to put list items. So that just kind of logically makes sense. If you go to the reference file, it will say that. It'll have some examples. Oh, here's an unordered list, and it's got list items. Oh, and look at this. This list item can have another sublist in it. So that's why over here it shows there's some nested items inside of there. All right. So let's see, if I wanted to add another paragraph, I can just start typing P, and it's even going to suggest what kind of options I have. And notice in here, it even put the closing set of characters in for me. So if it doesn't do that, you might not have it configured correctly or something. I believe that is the default now in the current version of VS Code. I used to have to install an extension for that. But just make sure as you're editing, sometimes you might mess something up, you know, and now it's really up to you to make sure the closing tag is there. It's just helping by giving you that initial closing tag for you. All right, so there's a page. We can look at what it looks like. So there is an extension built into VS Code. You can just go to the File Explorer and just double click on the file and it opens in the browser. And in the address bar, you could see like C:, whatever, and it's like the path down to that file. It's going to cause trouble if you do it that way when you're loading CSS files and other resources, because it's going to look in the wrong spot for files, because a lot of times you do relative paths to load up resources. But if I have this extension installed called Live Server, you'd want to just go to the extensions, type live here, and then install Live Server. What that gives you is the ability to right click on a page and select Open with Live Server. And now it's not a C:/ kind of path anymore. Now it looks like a normal website domain. And there we go. And I've got a contact us page that has nothing on it yet. But you see it navigated to the right spot and it loaded that page. All right, so time. Okay. So I want to go out and I want to show just a common site out there. Let's go just look at Twitter. I'm just going to go look at a site out here. And what if you wanted to figure out how to build this site? How do you figure out what HTML did they use to build this site? Luckily, Chrome gives us some really amazing tools. And Firefox also does this. If you right click on the page, there's this option called inspect. There's also a few page source, which a lot of people click, and that one's like, it's a little helpful, but it like gives all the code all at once. And notice here, it doesn't even include, maybe you have to trust me in this, it doesn't include a lot of this, a lot of these posts. So it's not showing that, like, where is there are recruiting from graduates in this source? It's not in here. This is what was downloaded from the browser initially when I hit the page. So this is like the source code file for that page. If I wanted to see, well, what's the markup for this post? I can right click on it and do inspect instead. And it will show me what is the markup for that particular item on the page. So I can see, I can hover over this and I see, oh, this is a span element. This has that text in it. I could just kind of mess with this page and say whatever I want to say. Welcome to Venture Cafe. Click off, and now my post says, welcome to Venture Cafe. That didn't really change anything at Twitter. It's not changing it for anyone else. It's just me messing around with the content of the page to see, well, if I change this, what would it look like? So it's meant to be a debugging tool to help you develop. But I could hover over all these elements here, and I could see, well, what HTML made that up? And as I keep going up, we're starting to see parent elements, and everything that they contain also gets highlighted. So here we can say this is highlighting that title, it's highlighting my text, and it's highlighting all those action buttons below. So if I click on that, there's this other styles window to the side. So we can see, well, how did they make that text that size? Okay, well, I can scroll down here in the styles and I can see what in here mentions text. Oh, font size 15 pixel. Well, what if that was bigger? Now the text of the font size of all the pages increasing. So Chrome developer tools and Firefox developer tools are amazing at that. So if you wanted to replicate a whole body of something, you just have to find the right element. Sometimes it can get hard to get the resizing here to be right, but okay, I'll just keep going up until okay, yeah, that's the element I want. How do I make that something that looks just like that? I could right click in this and edit the HTML. I can copy that out, and I can switch over to my code window, and I'm just going to put this down here for an example. And we'll see, here's what the text looks like. Let's see, Control Alt F. There we go. It's kind of came in all in one line, but it was really hard to read. There's Shift Alt F in VS Code will format the document. So you could see like what I just pasted in was a whole bunch of stuff. So there was a lot of code that went into that particular element. Probably more than you would have to style that element. This is what happens when you use like a big social network. Sometimes they're going to make their code a little bit harder to read because they're using a lot of cool features. So I'm just going to go ahead and undo pasting that for now. All right. So let me come back over to the CSS. I said I would show something about colors. So right now we don't see any colors on my page, but when I ran it, we did see some color. So where was that coming from? I've got this link in the head of my page. It's a style sheet and it says this file. So that is just a file that's open over here. So I can come over here and this is where all my styles are. So if I wanted to change the color, I could just type. There's about 120 or so named colors. So that as I start typing, there's a list of colors. You type a letter, it'll give you some names to go from for there. You can also do this hex format. Let's see, 232323. Sure, there's a color. If you're not sure how to make the color good, if you hover over it, it'll bring you this color picker, and we could say, well, I want color spectrum somewhere in this light blue range, and then I want that one. And now I picked that color. So no way are you're probably not going to memorize what these colors are and say, well, I went 2 shades lighter. What do I do here? Well, I don't know. I can't really tell you that. I would say open the color picker and drag it up. So that's the way I would do that. Alrighty. There's also a couple other ways to do color. If I click in this header, if I don't want to do RGB, maybe I want HSL. That's hue, saturation, and light. Maybe you're working on the artist and they say, I really want this hue, saturation, and light color. Well, you could specify it here. You can also do RGB long form with numbers, yeah, or HSL. So that's our 3 options. All right, I think back to the slides. All right, so the next thing is JavaScript. This is all the functionality of the page. So if I click somewhere, I want it to do some code. I think I did mention what these 3 are already, so I'll skip that slide. And I guess we'll go back to the courseware, or back to the code. Yeah, save that change. And so JavaScript is the way to add all the functionality to our page, like I mentioned before. If you notice, I have a JavaScript file here on the page, or not a file, I have a link to the file. That's not the only way we could do it. We could also do just a script tag, and we could do alert, hi. Alert is just like a really basic thing we could do on a page. So as I load the page, there it goes. That's an alert box. So that's your #1 JavaScript to learn, but you're probably not really going to use it in an end application. All right, so back over here to the script. Let's say I want to point over to the courseware site because I want to make sure that you see how to get to this later on. So over here at Nexul Academy, there's a start free now. It'll ask you to log in. It's just a Microsoft login. And yeah, so I'm going to come over here to JavaScript. And then you can go down the lessons here on the side and see the different aspects. So I'll point out a couple highlights before we get to Q&A here. Variables are the most core thing you're going to learn in any programming language. Not HTML and CSS, because that's not really programming. That's more just content and style. But like as in functional programming, functionality of your application, they're all going to have variables. Pretty much any language is going to have variables. It's just a box to put a value in. Is kind of a way to think about it. So it's like, I'm going to put a 5 in this box. I'm going to go do some other stuff, and later I'm going to say, what number was in that box again? And you could pull that value out of the box and look at it. Or you could change it and then put a new value in the box, right? So that's what a variable is. And so the general syntax in JavaScript is use the var keyword, whatever you want to call that box or that variable, and then =, and then what's its initial value. Okay. You can have variables that are numbers. You can have variables that are strings. You know, variables that are true or false values. And you can also do a bunch of custom ones as well. So if you want to learn about those, I would just scroll down this courseware and go through those. We don't really have enough time to go through all of it in this session. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with variables. There's a lot of complex statements you can do. You'll find this in most languages. You'll find a way to do conditionals. Conditionals like, well, in this case, I want to do this thing, and in another case, I want to do something else. That's where you're going to use a conditional. The most common one is an if-else. So we got some syntax here. You have the if keyword, a set of parentheses with some condition that will return true or false. And then inside a set of curly braces, you'll put, well, what do you want to do if that case happens? Now, if you've got 2 possible cases, that's where you do an if, and then after the if, you just put an else, and then what you want to do in the other case. And then you can combine that to do if this case, if this other case, if this other case, and then finally the fallback case is something else. So you can do a whole bunch of different cases for different situations as well. So lots of stuff to go over here. I do want to leave a little time for Q&A, so I'm going to go ahead and pop back over to the slides. Where is that? There we go. I wanted to go a little bit beyond the web. And so like, especially if you're a startup, you're probably going to want to have a mobile app along with your application. Sometimes it's good to build something that is a mobile app for your startup. Sometimes you want to build a website. Sometimes you want both. So in the case you only want a mobile app, maybe you just want to do Android or iOS app only and just stick to that. If that was the case, for Android, you're going to want to learn Java. And then that was like the original language of Android. And then now Kotlin is kind of like the hot new way to do Android. That's the way they're kind of pushing going forward. Just because of the licensing reasons on Java. iOS from Apple, the original language was Objective-C, but the more current times are Swift. That's the most common language for iOS apps at this point, for native mobile apps developed. But so if you build these two apps, that's not going to give you a website. You're still going to have to do a website separately, and there's no code sharing whatsoever there. So if you did want to build an application and you want it to work on both your mobile app and your website, there are some options for that as well. One of them you might have heard of, which is just build an iOS app or an Android app that all it is a web frame that just loads your web page. That's one way to do it. It's kind of not as good because you're not going to benefit from the native features of that platform. It'll be harder to use things like the gyroscope or the, just other built-in features, and it won't be as performant is really the big key because it's just rendering HTML and it can't optimize that for a really large application to be performant. So you want to build something that compiles down to native code, but yet lets you develop with web technologies if you want it to work on both. So there are some good web to mobile technologies in that regard. If you are an Angular developer, you already have an Angular website, you can develop in TypeScript using Angular NativeScript. So you develop your Angular web application, and then all you have to do is define views that use some different custom elements. So instead of like your divs, paragraphs, and other like plain HTML elements you'd use different elements in your view, in the view side of your code that says, well, I'm going to use a stacked layout, and I want to use a button element, and like there's a number of you can think of them as custom HTML elements that get compiled to those types of elements in the native app. So they'll take a stacked layout thing that looks like an HTML element, but it really just becomes a stacked layout item in the core compiled application to the native platform. And that's going to happen with all three of these I'm about to talk about. If you're a React developer and you created a React application, there's React Native. So you can take your React app, your website, and almost compile it to a native app. All you have to do is swap out the views, just like with Angular NativeScript. You swap out and you just do a different front end for that, but you can still share a lot of the same JavaScript code. If you're a backend developer and you're like doing C# all the time, and you don't really want to learn all that web stuff, you can build a Xamarin app. Xamarin can build mobile apps that deploy to both Android and iOS. And so you're not really doing front-end technologies there. You're just kind of being a back-end developer, but creating like some screens on mobile app. You can do that as well. Or just maybe you just prefer C#. Because you are starting to do some C# to do things that run in the browser, because Microsoft has come out with some new technologies for that. So you can always look into those things as well. And so you could do C# for your front-end code, your back-end, and your mobile app. It's not the most popular one. The most popular ones are Angular and React for doing front ends. And so that would be more likely if you're trying to hire somebody or get hired, that you're more likely to get hired doing Angular or React. So Angular NativeScript or React Native would be better options in that case, depending on which one you learn for doing the main website. Let's see. All right, so that was like the quick overview of becoming a web developer and maybe what you need to find to figure out who you need to hire for a web developer if you're a startup. So does anybody have any questions on anything that we went over?